Right.
Hello, everybody. My name is Timothy Gager, and welcome to Virtual Fridays Dire Literary Series. Our guest tonight is Mr. Mark Saba, and for Mark, Mark's going to read for us, and he's going to talk, do a Q&A, and here is Mark's bio for everybody. He was born and raised in Pittsburgh, which means he's never seen a baseball championship his entire life. Mark's been writing for more than 30 years in the genres of poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction. He's also directed 2 poetry videos. And as we scroll down a little bit, his education, University of Pittsburgh, Wesleyan University, where BoJack Horseman taught, and Hollins College, now Hollins University. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mark has a new book out, and I am assuming it's 2 novellas, and I am assuming that he'll be reading from it. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Mark.
Here's the book. This is by a publisher called Adelaide Books. And the 2 novellas are called A Look of All Ages and Fire and Ice. I'm going to read excerpts of Fire and Ice this evening. Fire and Ice has 2 main characters. One is Tom. He was raised in a very traditional Catholic household, went to a Catholic school, and his worldview has kind of, been defined by that. The other character is named Anne. She was homeschooled by her mother, never went to any kind of religious service in her life. It's very connected with nature. So they have 2 very different views of how to live and what it means to be alive. And their paths cross, and they both become interested in the other's worldview. Tom sort of has become less Catholic as he ages, and becomes very interested in religion, eventually converts to Catholicism. And then, of course, the fundamentalists prey on her, and she begins wondering what's going on. So it's in first person. I'll just go back and forth between Anne and Tom. This is Anne. Funny, I often forget how old I am. I feel I've been alive forever. I live where I am, not in something I've constructed. My memories reside independently of the place where I perceived them. Objects merely acted as props in the play. So I am at home anywhere, anytime, as long as I'm a part of this planet. Everything I know is tied to our little farm. That is where I learned about death, about rebirth, about just about anything there was. If I didn't see it firsthand, I heard it from my mother's mouth or from the books she chose for me to read. We solved problems together, abstract algebraic problems, as well as ethical problems, problems as old as humankind. The only order I knew was the cycle of day and night, of hunger and fulfillment, of the seasons eternally bleeding into one another. I awoke each morning knowing exactly what was needed for that day. If it was a day in February, I measured out the sphagnum moss in which to plant perennial seeds. If it was a day in November, I might dig up the leeks. In July, I followed dragonflies and birch beetles. In January, I read Emerson or listened to Stravinsky. Rarely did we buy anything that was not needed to sustain us. I had my winter boots and summer sandals, 3 pairs of shorts and 5 or 6 dresses for any special occasion. The rest was a blur. And that is why, after our house became a partial heap of charred rubble, I found it easy to live in the tool shed my father and grandfather had built. The meteor came crashing through the roof as I slept, as if a train had run through the house and then disappeared out the other side. Before I could gather my wits, I was overcome by a smell that made me wonder if I'd left a kettle to boil out on the stove all night. I'd heard of tornadoes that sound like freight trains, or trees that came crashing through a window on a windy night. But this night was calm and clear. I wondered how loud things could get in dreams. But the burning smell brought me quickly to my senses. I got out of bed and put on my slippers. By then I saw fire coming up the stairs, so I fled the house by climbing out a back window, which led me to a porch roof. From there, I leapt to the ground and watched part of my house go up in flames as the fire trucks arrived. The shed does me fine most of the time. My wits keep me company there, and I am able to ride out storms, heat waves, and frigid cold snaps as long as I prepare for them. Most of the time, it's just living though. And now that it's become so simple, it seems I'm living longer, as if time has actually spread itself thinner. Now a passage from Tom. My life has been divided not by days, but by relationships. Relationships I've had with others who helped define these divisions. If I had been brought into this world as a wild man living alone in a cave, I doubt I would remember much of it in the end. What is an endless succession of miserable days tacked onto an endless cycle of seasons? It's too much like infinity or death. Sometimes I imagine cities as they were in the distant past, even before they were built, when they were little more than rearranged dirt and landscaped plots. Who then determined what they would one day become? How was their fate coordinated? By what rules? A hallowed monument commemorating the deaths of those who died defending a society is built on the same ground that buries the sewage lines. A stately apartment building facing a breathtaking marine view shares a hillside with crows that devour a blue jay's young. The college student who studies days on end for a final exam passes the cleaning lady in his dorm who is having a good day because she has its predictable order tucked away in her head. I imagine also cities that have yet to be built, wooded hillsides and marshy estuaries where infinite tiny lives flourish and are ruined before we clear away the remains to build fortresses of human ingenuity, fortresses that allow our peculiar emotions to play out with little regard to the laws of nature. If I could, I'd like to watch history play out from a particular vantage point. I would see a city's evolution like a great, multifaceted organism containing multitudes of symbiotic creatures, a complexity that we alone have engendered. And within that city, that visible organism, lie our ideas and imaginations, both of which lead to ever more complexity in the way we build things and govern ourselves, the fruit we call miracles. Now back to Anne. I met a curious man this morning at the neighborhood store where I sell my vegetables. As I was unloading my crates of broccoli, he asked if I was having a good year. At first, I thought it strange that someone I didn't know should inquire into my personal life. Then I realized he was talking about my income, I think, from selling vegetables. I replied, I guess so. As long as there is sun and rain, I'm fine. He chuckled. And what about what you bring to the table? Anyone can do what I do. All it takes is a little experience. The rest is common sense. He looked perplexed, but I wanted to get back home in time for the storm, so I didn't pursue the conversation. We parted politely. That was Tom she meant, by the way. This is still Anne speaking. Storms are so lovely from where I watch them, on the little porch attached to my shed. I get wet, and once or twice I think the lightning was at my back, but that only makes it more worthwhile. What else is there to do in violent weather but study it? A good storm hits all my senses. I smell it as soon as it arrives. It lodges in my bones. I am knocked breathless by great swaths of blues and grays, and even the trees change color. The pelting rain creates melody out of chaos, and peals of thunder make my blood roar. Sometimes I choose something to read during the storm. It's not that I will find the same emotions in a book that I feel from the weather, but whatever the book is telling me, it will sink in more deeply. Reading for me is an exercise in humility. The book and I approach each other with open arms, but soon I am settled in its bosom, letting it soothe me with its wisdom. There is no other way for me to try to understand why I am here, or how I should interact with others who find themselves in the same conundrum of existence. If a book fails me, it is because it has no art, no refinement in its message. In that case, it is little more than an amusement park ride. And I have little use for amusement parks. There is plenty about me every day to provide amusement. Now back to Tom. I am fascinated by numbers, how they measure everything, the way they level out the playing field. You can't argue with them. You can use them as weapons or as a method of peaceful persuasion. They can be the only unbiased source of comfort or despair. Maybe that's why I am an accountant. I wear a bracelet that tells me how many calories I burn every day, how many steps I've taken, how fast my heart is beating, how many pounds I've lifted. It frees me to think about other things, then tally up the state of my health at the end of the day. Truly miraculous. I like to spend free time reading charts and graphs. They help me navigate and make sense of the world. I like knowing how many beans it would take end to end to reach the moon, for instance, or how many Tiffany's there are in Los Angeles. I also want to know what percent of Great Lakes Catholics voted for our current president and what percent have had an abortion. The statistics connect us all. It doesn't matter what religion you are or who your parents were or where you went to school. If I feel like a number, it's only because I am. And that number will help me get Social Security benefits, a driver's license, a discount at the drugstore, a way to store my money in the bank, even a win for my soccer team. Lately, we've all been a bit worried about climate change, but I believe numbers through science will save us in the end. We will be able to calculate the rate of the rising sea level and know in advance which cities are therefore most at risk. We will use better computers to generate probabilities to track storms and parcel out supplies according to populations. Everything will be counted and recounted. We will beat nature once again by recycling our waste and turning it into alternate items. No more masses of unaccounted for goods. Everything will be accounted for according to ever more accurate metrics. This is the world we live in, the one we created and will tend to, as long as we go on recreating it. And one more passage. This is Anne again. I don't really understand why people like to travel, to wait in lines at airports and train stations, to put up with digestive failure, unfamiliar bugs, and exasperated foreigners who throw up their hands at you and appear to be rude. I traveled a bit when I was younger, but now I see the folly in traveling for pleasure. My most rewarding trips have been the educational ones, the ones I took off season when I saw people as they truly are. They looked upon me as an equal in their daily lives. I welcome visitors to my home, even strangers. After all, I don't have much to steal. I enjoy their company. They are as good as books. I like people who become part of my daily life, not players in outlandish events like weddings or props in orchestrated scenes as those we see on vacation. One of my friends, Walt, collects junk. He lives a short distance down the road. His property bleeds seamlessly into the surrounding countryside, and he tends the wild as much as his somewhat tamed grounds. Once Walt had come to me looking to borrow a casserole dish. I had one and I lent it to him. On his way out the door, he bumped into another friend of mine, Helen, who rarely visits me anymore. She took one look at him and ran. What was it about Walt that made her do that? Walt and I had a good laugh about it, but I could tell underneath he was a little spooked by the experience. I mean, Walt wouldn't hurt a turtle. All I could think of was the way he looked, not his appearance, the way he looked. There was something underneath Walt that I think might scare people. It's in his eyes. They are not evil eyes or intimidating or even penetrating eyes. They are purely and simply honest. So full of honesty that people don't quite know how to handle them. Maybe they've never seen honesty before, and the physical evidence of it is too unnerving. Something else about Walt. He is hard to locate in time. There's nothing about his clothing that would give it away. He might even be a ghost transported here from the 1870s, 1930s, or 1970s. I don't even have a clue how old he is. But this thing about Walt that scares people away, I think I am drawn to it. He is in some way a reflection of my own life. I'm not growing an economy. Neither am I intent on knocking down everyone else's competitors. It does no good, and besides, I don't get it. I'm more interested in tending to the planet in my small, interconnected way. When I go, I'll go in peace. I think it's my 10 minutes, Tim.
That was a great reading. Yes.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
So,
Of course, I got some questions for you
okay.
if you're ready. So this section of your book, which is two novellas, Fire and Ice, and the second one is Luke of All Ages.
Yep.
So in the passage you just read, you have two characters, which are the main characters, written in first person point of view. Did you find it difficult switching back and forth? Was there kind of like a method acting situation going on, or?
Well, I think because the characters are so different themselves, it was easy to find their voices. And I was, I kept putting myself in their heads and thinking, how are they reacting to the world and what they're saying and how they interact with people. I guess if the characters weren't so different, it might have been a little bit more difficult. I mean, but everything about them is completely opposite. And as I said later on in the book, when they get to know each other, he ends up kind of rescuing her during a big snowstorm, and they get to know each other better. And her shack finally caves in, and then she comes to live with him, and they have a kid together. And then, how they raise the kid is like, they have different ideas about that. So a lot of stuff happens, but there are a lot of weather events that happen in the book. So they're always being tested by just the environment, So it kind of tests Anne's preconceptions about nature and, how she lived with it all these years. And now it feels like it's turning on her by being so violent. Whereas Tom feels like, we're above nature. We can control nature. We shouldn't have a problem doing this. Which I think is more in line with someone who had a more strict religious upbringing when everything's set and planned. Okay.
Now with those two characters, was one easier to write than the other? And if not, which character caused more pauses in your writing?
Yeah, I know where you're going with this. So yeah, I was raised Catholic, and I feel like, I don't go to church very often, if at all, these days. But I was always very interested in like naturalism and like the Japanese Shintoism and a lot of the the nature religions, I guess you would call them, because I also had a very deep connection to nature growing up, and I did a lot of gardening. My grandfather taught me about gardening. I was very connected to everything that's going on in the seasons. And I wouldn't say that the religion and that were fighting each other, but I as I get older, I saw people who didn't see the other side, those, the religion versus no religion, or, controlling nature versus living with it. They seem to be okay. They seem both to be okay to me. So I wouldn't say that I had more trouble writing one or the other for that reason.
Now, with that in your own view of religion, did that seep in? Did your own view of religion seep in to the book in ways that you didn't wish it to?
Well, I guess there was a certain point of discovery. I mean, later on in the book, there's this woman, she's a very fundamentalist Christian Catholic, who tries to like take over Anne's view of Catholicism. And Anne, being the nice person she is, kind of goes along with it. But eventually she starts finding out that maybe this isn't exactly what she signed up for. So like figuring out how she was going to react to that woman, that was something that was a little bit of a struggle for me to write about. I didn't know how it was going to turn out. But that's part of, what writing a novel is about, I think. You have to.
Well, this publisher, Adelaide Books, they list themselves as history, religion, and esoteric teachings. Now, this book has some religious themes. Did you find them, or did they find you? What happened to?
I approached them, and that was it. And they said, "Yeah, we like it. We'll publish it." So they're a fairly new publisher. I think they've been on only a few years, but it looks like they're willing to take at least some risk on on me or other right. I actually bought another one of their books, Book of Stories, which I thought was really good. So I think at least they have good taste.
Now, on the blurb on the back of your book, it mentions how you write about life, meaning, loss, meditative stories, and like using emotions. Do you write from that? Do you jumpstart your writing through your emotions, or do you work outside of that? Do you project emotion into your writing?
Well, I've always liked Wordsworth's line that he writes emotion recollected in tranquility. So I think, of course, all those emotions are in there, but I give myself a lot of peace, a lot of time to work through anything before I write it down, or even before it appears in one of my characters, I think. Um, I'm actually a very slow writer. I'm a trickler, not a gusher. I think some people write just keep writing and zoom right through and write pages and pages, and then they go back and chop it up. But I don't do that. I write very slowly. I'll write a sentence and I'll reread it 5 times before I write the next one. It doesn't mean I don't rewrite, but it means I really consider what I'm writing as I'm writing it. And I think that partly has to do with my constraints on time. I mean, I just haven't always had a lot of it. So I think if I'm going to write that down, I need to have thought about it and reflected on it some first.
Did you find it hard to write in a woman's point of view when you're writing Anne?
I've written a women's point of view many times. Half of the stories in Ghost Tracks, the book from Big Table Publishing, are from a woman's point of view. That never even entered my mind, actually. So I don't know. I don't know why.
Amy asks you, do you consequently rewrite less? For example, Kurt Vonnegut also wrote sentence by sentence with very little revision.
I probably do rewrite less than some other writers that are tricklers. That aren't tricklers. What I do is I write carefully, and then I write in longhand with a pen and paper. I don't write on the computer. As I'm typing it in, I'm probably rewriting some of those sentences. And then I print out the first draft and read it very carefully. And at that point, I might omit a passage or add some new ones. I'll actually scribble on the back of the printed page. So I don't know. I guess I would say I'm sort of a moderate rewriter. I do rewrite, and I also like to let things cool off quite a bit, like 6 months after I print that thing out, to go back to it, because I find that things stand out, like mistakes stand out more easily for me. I'm too attached to it, if I go back to it too soon.
What was the timeline between the 2 novellas? Were they written back to back, or were they meant to be paired with one another?
No, not really. A Look of All Ages I started about 10 years ago. And A Look of All Ages is just about one character. It's sort of semi-autobiographical. And it's about one character's life from childhood through old age. Actually older than I am. So, and, a lot of, misfortunes happen in the person's life, and a lot of happy things happen. And it's this sense that he always feels like he's the same person no matter what age he is. And the book, the narration jumps around in time. So it starts out with childhood, then goes to like old age, then goes back to middle age. And so they get the sense that it's the same person, no matter how, he's expressing himself at what age. And I put that away, and I didn't think anyone would be interested in it, really. And then Fire and Ice, I just wrote a couple years ago, and it just happened to have some of the same themes, because there is also a fair amount of religion in A Look of All Ages, just about the upbringing of the character and all that. So then I decided they went together, and I presented them that way. But it kind of happened serendipitously. I didn't plan it from the start to be like that.
Well, did you find that once you put them together, there was stuff in Fire and Ice that was too close to A Look of All Ages?
Maybe, except I don't really overtly describe religion much in A Look of All Ages. It's kind of there in the background. But in Fire and Ice, especially the opening chapters, I actually describe his childhood impressions of religion. And I don't really do that in the Luke of All Ages. It's there, but I don't talk about it that much. So.
Well, the fun part of getting questions in the chat is the questions will pop up that were like, 2 minutes ago. So let's rewind a little bit. So your process, you said that you write longhand and then you type. Do you write do you type it up daily, or do you wait until the whole thing is done before you?
No, I wait till it's done, which is to me part of the cooling off process too. So, if it's, let's say it takes me a year to write a novella, by the time I'm done writing out longhand, I know it's a fire hazard, but that's just the way I do it.
Well, judging from the stack of books, I guess fire hazard is not a problem at all.
I guess not. But I think once I start typing it in, then I go back to the beginning, and I've got a fair amount of distance from it. So as I said, I sort of rewrite as I'm typing it in. Like, that sentence sucks. I'm going to change that right now. So that gives me some distance that allows me to see it more objectively. And then, as I said, once I type it all in and print it out, then I'll let it sit again for probably a few months.
All right, let's go ahead to talk about Ghost Tracks for a second, which is a book that I have that I enjoyed, and it's a book of short stories about Pittsburgh's past.
Yeah.
Now, did you have to research? Did you have to research a lot about Pittsburgh's past, or what was the research process with the short stories within that?
I didn't research a whole lot for this. Most of it came from experiences I had or characters I knew growing up, stories people told me. So I actually did very little research for that. It was all in my head. Or
any of the characters that you knew growing up to read about themselves, or
any of the characters alive today, you mean?
Yeah.
Actually, I think most of them have passed. I don't think there's. I'm just looking at the table of contents.
If there was, right, let's take this, let's go to a world that every single character is still alive. Who would have the most to say about one of your stories in there?
Who would have the most to say? I don't know. There's a story about a mill worker who was my neighbor, who probably would be surprised I even wrote about him. And he was a very interesting character. He raised canaries in his basement. And their house was next door to ours. And I could just walk in there anytime I wanted and go down and check out the birds. And he was kind of a typical, working Pittsburgh guy, a little rough around the edges, but really nice to kids. And he let me like fart around in there with his birds. Like, could have, probably caused some trouble. But now come to think of it, my wife is in some of these stories, so she's still in with us. That's it. Another, I don't know, I wrote a story also about a friend of mine who was in a monastery for a while. He left the monastery. I don't know if you know Thomas Merton.
No.
He was a monk excellent writer, Thomas Merton. And he was my friend's confessor in this monastery. But I wrote a story about something he told me about the monastery, and he probably would be surprised that I put that in there. But I said he's not around anymore.
So Ghost Tracks is so distinctly different from your latest book, but you also write poetry, and you also you write in multi-genres. Do you find yourself, you stay in one section or one genre for a while, or when you write, do you bounce around?
I consider my fiction something to do between poems. And I also consider my fiction poems. My writing is very, very condensed and tight. I think that's why I'm drawn to the novella. And when I read other fiction, I'm constantly like striking out words in my head, thinking, that doesn't need to be there. That doesn't need to be there. When I was in college, I got encouragement from a teacher writing fiction before I had ever wrote poetry. And she actually said, you should learn poetry because it'll help your writing. Then I realized that I'm actually probably more of a poet than anything, but I can't force a poem. I just can't do it. I know that some people can do it. But if you say write a poem about something, I'll write the poem, but I won't feel good about it, and I won't feel it's one of my best poems. So the poems, I just have to wait till they come. But I didn't want to sit there and do nothing, waiting for poems to come. So then I thought I'm gonna still write fiction. So
it's a very unique perspective on that. I think that's usually it's the other way around. People write poems in between their fiction or in between their novels.
Yeah. Well, in reality, that's what I do, but I think of it in reverse, because I spend more time writing the fiction, because I will sit down and I'll plow ahead with fiction. I don't feel like I have to be, inspired every single day to do that. I mean,
all right. So your latest book, the Novellas, is very interesting form. What do you consider the best novellas? What are your favorite novellas?
Death in Venice is one. There's also, I forget the name of it now, but it's a Christmas story by Tolstoy, and I can't remember the name of it. A friend of mine turned me on to it years ago. But I'd say those two are probably my favorite.
Very good. Well, Mark, thank you so much. So where can we find your books? What is your favorite indie bookstore that people can go to and buy your two novellas, A Luke of All Ages?
Well, the best place is straight with the publisher.
And the publisher is Adelaide Books.
Adelaide Books.
Or all you do is you go to Mark's site, you click Adelaide Books.
Yep.
And look how fast that computer running. It's just steaming along. There it is. And there it is. You can give it 5 stars while you're here.
Tim, I see somebody asked, is it hard to publish novellas? And I think traditionally it has been hard, but I think with so many small presses these days, it's probably a little easier than it has been in the past. And I also have this feeling that our lives are so busy and frenetic that the novella is a good length, that you can really actually start it and finish it and not worry about, having a ton of time to devote, because you probably don't have a lot of time. So I don't know. Maybe some people like extremely long books because they feel they can escape for that amount of time. But I always feel like my time is so constrained and precious that I want every word to matter,
People's attention spans are a lot less. Do you have any flash fiction, speaking of people's attention span?
I don't know. I think I probably did when I was younger. I'm sure I did. I got things in the closet over there that are 30 years old that are flash fiction pieces, but I don't really do that anymore. I might try it again. So I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on and reading from your book. And you folks that are watching on Facebook, I'm going to say goodnight to you. If you ever want to come and be involved in the Q&A or read at the open mic, which follows this, you just use the Zoom link. But I appreciate you, and I'm going to say goodnight to you. And after I click goodnight, I'll probably say some stuff about you too. So good night, y'all.